Hey everyone, it's Brandon Siraki here, founder of Forteck, currently operating as president and CEO. We have a few of our other staff on here. Victor, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
I'm Victor Filbert, working with Forteck here as well. Got a heavy silviculture background, site prep, planting, planning all of those projects. So yeah, I got invited to help participate in this one.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you on the webinar here today, Victor. I know you've helped me quite a bit with going through and finalizing all these slides. As well, we have Riley Armstrong, so she'll be our administrator for today, letting everyone into the Zoom room, and there'll be some other Forteck staff on here as well. We have Danielle on here, who's actively our project and operations manager for Alberta. If you want to wave and say hi. It's Danielle. So yeah, we'll get started here as we're letting a few people come into the meeting. So yeah, I started Forteck in 2016. So Forteck specializes in forestry and environmental services across Western Canada with a focus on quality, accuracy, and safety. We currently operate in Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan. We have a pretty large list of services. And today we're going to be focusing on site prep, which is one of our services. And we'll be going into detail on site preparation for basically cut block prepping for tree planting. So yeah, I have a link to our website on here. So if you guys haven't been on yet, you can check it out. It's just www.forteck.ca. So there's about us, our list of services, careers. We also have a store, a shop that you guys could check out. There's Forteck Apparel, All Good in the Woods, Women in Forestry. I'm just sort of going over our website here for anyone that just joined, just waiting for a few more people to funnel in before we get started the webinar. So here's a list on our website of all of our current services. So we do a lot of forestry development, so cut block layout, timber cruising, that sort of thing. And then really anything in the scope of forestry and environmental services in Western Canada is what we have a focus on. All right, well, I see quite a few people funneled in here now, so we will go ahead and get started with our webinar for today. So January 26th, got Brandon Siraki here and Victor Filbert. Victor Filbert comes from a strong background of site preparation and silviculture primarily. So he'll be here today to answer any questions that you guys have as I go through the webinar. So why we site prep? The main focus of site preparation is being able to plant trees in conditions to which they will have the best success rate. So site preparation has many benefits to reforesting cut blocks, such as reducing soil compaction, altering the microsite, reducing competition of other species, altering water table levels, and more. As we go through the webinar here, there will be some question periods. So if you guys have any questions, you can ask to be unmuted or unmute yourself at those sections, or if you have any questions as we go through, you can feel free to message them in the chat. Videos don't have to be on, but if you guys are asking questions, I would prefer that you have your video on just so that we can see who's speaking to the camera. So types of site prep. So we have mounding. So under mounding, there's whole mounding and brachy mounding are the two common. We'll be looking at ripping today as well, drag scarification and disc trenching. So whole mounding is using an excavator to build mounds of dirt that trees can be planted on or on the side of the mound. Typically whole mounding is done in wet ground conditions, so can get the site elevated to a lot higher elevation with the whole mound. The mounds are quite big, and that allows for the trees to be elevated above wet ground conditions or other competition factors such as grasses and other tree species or shrubs. So whole mounding, planting is required afterwards. Whole mounding is best done in the fall, the year prior to planting. Size of mounds you can create are typically 1 foot tall by 2 feet long. Really, it's going to be dependent on the bucket size that you're using, so that will help determine the size of the mounds. So access, you're going to typically want solid ground. So usually the work is done in the winter so you can get everywhere that you need to. Yeah, if you try to do it and it's too soft to ground, and you're usually going to be mounting in wetter ground conditions. So you need to make sure that you can get there. So typically it'd be frozen. So pros to whole mounding are able to mound on most terrain, including slopes and in wet areas, create some more natural patterns. The cons to whole mounding is that it's slower and more expensive than other forms of site preparation. So brachy mounding, often referred to as mini mounding in North America. Brachy is a brand mounder. So an alternative that is most affordable and has a skidder attachment is the brachy mounder. So it works by raising and advancing strips of earth. So it forms rows of mounds that can be planted on. So brachy mounding, some of the pros is that it's fast and cost effective. It's summer accessible ground, and it's typically pulled behind a skidder, so it leaves a lighter machine footprint than other various site prepping. Creates elevated planting site, and on average, the typical production is sort of 0.8 to 1 hectare per hour. So it's quite quick. Most effective in large areas. Some of the cons is that it's a non-powered mounder, so it's not ideal on frozen ground conditions, and it's not good with heavy slash. You're typically limited to large open areas when brachy mounding. So ripping is typically done by a D8 cat. So you would have a V-shaped plow or shank on the back of the cat, and you just basically go back and forth across the cut block, making your mounds or your rip. The time of year this is done is early November. You're typically going to want some like frozen, heavy frozen ground conditions for these types of machines because D8 is quite heavy. So yeah, it's typically all done in the winter, starting as early as November. Planting is highly suggested afterwards. So yeah, we have our first question period. If anyone has any questions so far on the different types of mounding equipment, feel free to type in the chat or unmute yourself. Riley, if someone types in the chat, can you just read the question off to me so I don't have to try to search and find it?
Yeah, I can do that.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, if there's no questions, we'll go to the next slide.
Sorry,
So-
Brandon. Somebody had asked what kind of production do you get out of the hole mounting?
I'll let Victor answer this question. I see he unmuted himself.
Yeah, I did. Funny enough, we actually have that on a slide coming up. Hole mounting would typically be between 0.2 and 0.5 hectares per hour. It is traditionally slower because they're basically making one mound every scoop, so it's not the fastest, and that's traditionally what I've seen in my experience with it through cut blocks. That's correct. Yeah, about half.
Thanks for that, Victor. Any other questions, Riley?
Nope, that's it for now. Oh, sorry, there's one more. What is the mound density of the brachy mounds per hectare?
It can vary based on how the brakes are set up and also the distance between basically the drive paths. So depending on which system you're running, so the picture that we have up top is basically a 3-row system. There's also a 2-row system that exists out there as well. That's what I've worked primarily with. It easily can get 1,400 stems per hectare, but I have seen the system work up to get to 2,000 with how the brake system works and how close the driver drives to his previous line. So you kind of have to work with the operator on that one and throw a bunch of plots to see what changes he needs to do so that he can get comfortable with it.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Victor. All right, if there's any more questions, I guess let me know. Otherwise, we'll move on to drag scarification. All right, so drag scarification is shark fin barrels and chains dragged behind either, well, typically a skidder, could be dragged behind something else. So it aligns the slash and tears open the duff layer with intent to bring cones into the exposed mineral soil. So typically drag scarification is designed for use on pine sites. The reason for this is that if it's done right and the pines release their seed properly, then you shouldn't need to plant the site. So it can be a lot cheaper if you do have heavy pine sites to use drag scarification if you can get really good natural regen. So yeah, it can be done in the summer and or it is done in the summer, and it does not work very well in heavy slash or steep slopes. And it is the cheapest of all site prep types. So now we're going to go on to disc trenching. So disc trenching is typically behind a skidder. It's similar to what farmer would use to disc their fields. The intent of disc trenching is to create an elevated planting site. Time of year that disc trenching is done is typically in the summer and fall, and planting is highly suggested afterwards. Any questions on drag scarification or disc trenching? All right, if there's no questions, then we'll move on. So it's important that you choose the right type of site prep when you're looking at, cut blocks that need to be site prepped for reforestation. If it's not done properly, some of the things that can be expensive would be cost of a replant. So if you end up not choosing the right type of site prep or not properly executing on the site prep, you know, the cost can be substantial. It could mean going in and replanting areas to make sure that you pass your regeneration standards. And it would most likely delay. So if it's done poorly, it would delay the, you know, the rotation of the forest. So the wood supply wouldn't be coming back as well or as quickly as it would if the site prep and planting execution is done correctly. As well, there could be additional costs for future stand tending if site prep is not executed properly. Production and KPIs. So mounding, we have hole moundings. Or Victor, did you want to touch on this?
Yeah, I could. Yeah, so with the different types of mounting that we have, hole mounting, as mentioned before, typically what I've seen is 0.2 to 0.5 hectares an hour. So in their traditional shift, they're going to be, so these vary based on what potential slash loading is there. That's actually the biggest variable that I've seen. If they've got to move a bunch of slash, then it does take them longer to actually create the mound in the end. So that's definitely one of them. How deep the frost layer goes, that's another one as well that affects the production, because typically where I've sent all my hoe work has been on heavier frozen ground that you either can't access in the summer just because it's basically a floating pine site in the middle of a skeg. That's always the fun one to try and get to for traditional site prep. And with bracky mounds, mini mounds is typically 0.8 to 1.2 hectares, and that typically is just if it's a nice flat site, the operator doesn't have to think too much about, you know, avoiding obstacles or worrying about the hill, so you can just drive nice big straight lines and works out well. With ripping, 0.4 to 0.7 an hour. You're working on behind a cat, so they're not the fastest tool out there to drive. But that's typically what he's doing. He's got this nice big shank and plow hanging in the ground and ripping stuff apart. So it's a little bit slower. Drag scarification, you're typically behind a skidder. So he's going to be 0.8 to 1.2 hectares, and distrenching is very much the same. So you can see that anything that's being pulled by a skidder, they're obviously going to be faster than any track machine. So that's just something to always take into account. And obviously size of the blocks plays a big factor. Size of your treatment unit plays a big factor into how much ground they're going to be able to cover in a day and how separated they are as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Victor. Actually, just back to that slide, was there any questions on sort of the production for each site prep type? All right, if not, we will go on to the next slide. Now there's some hole mounding. Cost of projects. So professional and general liability needs to be carried for all contracts. Equipment insurance for logging equipment. Costs of each type of equipment from cheapest to most expensive. So we went over this in the past slides, but drags are the cheapest. Bracky mounding would be the next, then ripping, and followed by hole mounting, which is the most expensive. So typically, you know, it's going to range anywhere from $200 to $2,000 a hectare, depending on what ground conditions you're in, the project location, and then obviously what type of site preparation that you're doing. So now we're going to go over the process from start to finish. So you identify whether site prep is required. So that'd typically be done by a silviculture forester or some sort of registered forestry professional, so an RPF or an RPFT or RFT. You identify areas and what type of prep is needed for each area. you determine the seasonality of the block to determine the prep type required. So even if you have a summer ground block, but you can't get there with equipment in the summer, then it's going to have to be winter site prep. So yeah, a lot of times it's going to depend on access to the blocks, as well as the general ground conditions of the block, how wet it is. GPS areas need to be provided to the operator to use on their machines. So this would be used for tracking purposes, so they know where they're at and what areas they're covering. For us, we would typically use field maps, so Esri product, and we can map out, where they have their tracks going for the day, so we can see where they've been working, and that can get uploaded nightly to be viewed by our clients. So work commencement, typically working 8 to 9 hours a day of actual operating time. Then there'd be travel back and forth and equipment maintenance on top of that. So quality audits be completed throughout the project course. So once you get started, typically the silviculture forester working at the mill, or whoever's in charge of the project, would come out and do some quality audits, just to check how well the contractor is doing, and if there's any adjustments that need to be made in order to hit the required quality metrics. So sometimes that would be, density of how close together, the spacing of the rips or the mounds, things like that would be looked at, as well as the depth and the height of the rips or mounds, or etc. So then finally you would need files of wherever the contractor was working, sent to the client so that the client can issue payment. And then lastly, the forestry professional would input everything into provincial databases. Transportation of equipment. So typically a tractor trailer unit, so a low bed, would be used for transporting the large pieces of equipment. Depending on the time of year, may need special permits to move equipment, including basic permits if there's extra wheels.
Brandon, we do have a question. Somebody said, what about soil cap thickness criteria / target? What is the optimum?
Victor, go ahead.
I knew it was coming. Yeah, so typically when you're looking at your sites, when you're flipping your mounds over, is your question targeted more towards mounds, or is it just in general for the site? Mounds and ripper. Okay. So with mounds, typically what you're looking for is when you flip the cap over, you're going to want probably a minimum of 10 centimeters into your top, because when you look at what the plug's going to be doing, you want your half your plug to be in the mineral cap, and then the other half to be in the duff layer that gets flipped over and basically doubles its thickness. So when you're looking at traditional mini mounds or brachy mounds, they're going to be about a foot tall, depends on your break, I guess, but they're going to be about a foot tall off the ground. So that's going to get into 10 to 15 centimeters of your mineral layer, as well as through your duff layer. And if you're on pine sites versus spruce sites, obviously those layers differ a little bit, but that would be kind of your target. And as far as optimum for that, I've always asked planters and worked with planters to try and get, if you think of a plug size as like size of a pop can, because it's just easier to picture that way. Like I said, it's kind of half in the mineral soil and half into that duff layer, because then as that duff decomposes, there's a huge shot of nutrients going to the plug. And then with the half in the mineral cap, what that's doing is keeping a exposed area for reduced competition. It's going to take competition longer to get into that. So grasses or other species, willow, alder, those are typically the ones you would see right away. But even other trees like your aspen or your black poplar will take a little bit longer to get through that, just because it won't be affected as nicely through the decomposing material that you've got there. As far as rippers, that's kind of a tougher variable. Typically, I've seen them work best on pine sites again, so thinner duff layers. And what you're doing is you're ripping into the ground somewhere, hopefully about 10 centimeters is kind of your target to get that ripper shank in. And then the plow is basically pulling it apart and separating it to create your open exposed mineral site. I've seen it work with drag chains behind as well, to kind of knock some of the cones back in that are dispersed through the plow. I've had moderate success with it, still had to go back in and do basically a light plant after. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question or not. Kind of went around it a little bit. Awesome. Thanks, Al.
Thanks, Victor. All right, so on to the next slide, equipment maintenance. So typically you're gonna have a morning inspection. Then you're gonna go ahead with your daily operation. At the end of the day, you're gonna be typically greasing, track cleaning if your machine has tracks. Fueling is typically done at the end of the shift. So it's good to go for the next guy or the next day. Monitoring maintenance records. So just staying in communication with mechanics to ensure timely changeouts of filters, hoses, oil, etc. So yeah, it's good to have good communication with your mechanics as to what's going on and what's upcoming that it will need maintenance. And then washing is typically done when moving sites to avoid transfer of invasive species. So if you're going to go from one area to load up and go to a new block further away or something, then that may be a good time to wash your machine. Make sure that you're not going to be moving any sort of invasive plants from project to project area, specifically in the summer when it's more prone to that, but year round as well. So operators experience. So what we look for, or I guess in general, what anyone would be looking for with operators is years of experience running heavy equipment. You'd be looking for the specific machine experience. So if they're going to be running a hoe, doing hoe mounding, then obviously you want someone that's got extensive experience of running a hoe and completing mounding. And then, if you're going to be doing something that involves a skidder, then you want to make sure that the guy has experience with running skidders. So yeah, we'd be looking for specifically as years or months on specific machines and what sort of work they've completed in those specific machines. Something that's really important too is mechanical ability. If you have an operator that has some mechanical aptitude, then they can sort of let everyone know when they think things may need looked at by a mechanic, or if they can troubleshoot some of the things and fix it themselves, and that always saves a lot of time and money as well. So education, typically for operators running heavy equipment, what you're looking for is a high school diploma at a minimum, and then additional schooling would also be considered an asset. So someone that has strong forestry background would be awesome, because they can understand a bit more about the forest than maybe someone that doesn't have that background. As well, anyone with any sort of mechanical education or background is super beneficial. Basic maintenance. basic maintenance, so are they able to complete basic maintenance of equipment and relay information to mechanics? So that's something you'd be looking for as well. So yeah, if you are interested in hiring Forteck for any of your projects, we can complete hole mounting or ripping or other various forms of site prep. We have the capacity to plant up to 2 million trees for 2023 planting season. We provide helicopter services as well now. So if you have any need to use helicopters for any sort of work, flying in, planting crews, slinging boxes of trees, really any sort of work that could be done with helicopters, A-Stars or similar models, feel free to reach out. We complete planting prescriptions as well if needed. We can submit tree orders and complete cone collection. Here's a more detailed list of all of our services. So yeah, Forteck is capable of providing all services within the scope of forestry and environmental services in Western Canada. A list of our current services is below. If you need more information, feel free to contact us via email to info@forteck.ca. All right, so do we have Allison on here? Anyone know? If not, I'll go through the slide. So yeah, we are hiring. So Forteck right now is looking for forestry technicians in Alberta and British Columbia. So anyone that's got forestry education or extensive forestry field experience, we're looking to hire. We're looking to hire for waste and residue surveyors in British Columbia for the summer. And then we also have a summer student program for Alberta and British Columbia. So if you are interested in working with us, or you know anyone that's interested in working with us, have them send over a resume to careers@forteck.ca. So yeah, if you want to get in touch with us to book a project, you can shoot the QR code on the screen here to schedule a 30-minute consultation with Nicole. So this would be if you are interested in hiring Forteck. Nicole works in sales with us, and then as well, you could contact me. My information's on there. It's my phone number and my email. You just have first.last name @forteck.ca. And I'm not sure if you guys follow us all on social media or not, but we have our Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So this webinar will be posted to the YouTube, and so you'll be able to go follow it there. And then Riley, will you be sending out the recording or the PowerPoint as well?
Yeah, I'll shoot out the PowerPoint and the recording, but then I've also just put the YouTube channel in the chat there. So if anybody wants to watch the recording afterwards, I'll get that uploaded on there.
Okay, that sounds great. Have we had any more questions come in at all?
Luis was wondering, he says, I live in Mexico and I'm a forestry engineer. Do I have the opportunity to work with you?
Yeah, Louise, you could send in a resume to careers@Forteck. Oh, I don't know what I did to the screen there. You could send in a resume to careers@Forteck.ca. Just says in the bottom right-hand corner here. And then we can review your resume and set up an interview. Typically we have a 2-part interview process. So you'd have first interview, which sort of goes over cultural fit to see if we think that you'll fit well on our team. And then our second interview is more about your technical abilities. So it'd be your your forestry education, forestry experience, everything technical would be in the second interview, and then we would typically do follow up with references and possibly a core values presentation as sort of our hiring process. So yeah, anyone that is interested in working with us, you can feel free to send in a resume to careers@forteck.ca. We are hiring in Alberta and BC primarily, so Alberta and British Columbia, Canada. In regards to coming from Mexico, we have hired overseas in the past. I can, there's paperwork that has to go with that. It can be a bit of a process, but for the right candidate, we are interested in looking at that as an opportunity. Any additional questions?
Yes, if you don't mind, Brandon. I have a couple of colleagues that work and have worked in forestry in Honduras and in Belize. And so on that note that you mentioned of, working to get people, a permit to be here in Canada, what is it that you're looking for? And like some of these people have a kind of an interesting history, but they're very good at what they do. Yeah, it would be interesting to understand what it is and why you would want to hire someone from outside the country and how you would go about doing that.
Yeah, so what we've done in the past is worked with we've had our hiring manager, Allison, work with a sort of a contracting company that specializes in bringing over overseas candidates. So from my understanding, I haven't been super involved in the process, but if Allison is on here, she could talk more. But basically you have to do a posting to the Canada Job Board for so many weeks, and then see what come in for candidates, and then basically prove to the government that you aren't able to find the candidates locally, and then you would have to work with like the LIMA, I think is what it is, process to get a overseas candidate approved to come work here. So yeah, in the past we basically got resumes, or we did job posts and got resumes, and then candidates apply, and then we do interviews with them, and if we think that they're a good fit, then we sort of take the process of working to get them over here. But yeah, it can be quite lengthy, anywhere from a few months to a year, depending on the situation. And what we're looking for with candidates, I guess, is anyone that's worked in similar forest types is really good. So if you go across the globe, we went in about a year ago, we went through and sort of looked at, hey, what areas in the world have similar forest types as us, where there's forestry professionals that may be interested in working on some sort of short-term or long-term work permit in Canada. Then what we're looking for is someone that has similar experience. So someone that's worked maybe in similar forest types and similar types of logging. It's a lot more selective logging in a lot of other places of the world, and then a lot more of like planted stands than Canada, but some of it is quite applicable. So hopefully that helped answer your question.
Yeah, absolutely it does. I mean, the forest types in Belize and Honduras are quite different, although there are pine forests and some similar types of forests. It's actually a lot more complex down there. So because they have like thousands of species of trees versus dozens, it means that these the people are very well versed in what it is that they do. And I believe that they could very quickly pick up the I don't want to say simpler because it's different, but less diverse forest types that we have here. and forestry activities. Like, yeah, you're right. Selective logging is a big part of what they do down there. But at the same time, doing layout, being able to follow forest, different forest types and stand ages, that sort of thing, is something that's, especially to someone who's spent like 20 years or 30 years in the industry, something that does come quite easily, right? Once you have the eye for it, it's quite simple. So yeah, I'd be interested maybe to discuss that a little further with you, because I do have a couple of colleagues that I work with at a research station in Belize. They're from Honduras. One has actually moved to Toronto since then, and I've kind of discussed some opportunities with them, both with my business doing biological work, but also with potentially with you all, because we have been in touch in the past. So thank
Okay.
you for taking the time.
Yeah, no, that's great. Feel free to message in the chat direct to, probably Riley would be the best. You can, if you just click her name, Riley Armstrong. She's our administrator for the meeting. If you want to just message your contact info into there, then we can connect after or later at a later date.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking for. I'll find her. Riley Armstrong. Thank you.
Yeah, she's our administrator for the meeting or the webinar. Awesome. Thanks, Will, for that. Do we have any other questions around employment opportunities? Or any other questions about anything else related to, site prep, all the slides we went over, anything in general regarding the webinar? I did briefly go over at the start here, but of our website, but if you guys do want to just sort of browse around and see a bit more about us, sort of what we have for equipment, our services, you can just go into the web browser and just search right here, www.forteck.ca/services. And then there's going to be a list of our services. If you go to about, there'll be about us information. We have our values on here, Indigenous relations. You can subscribe to our weekly emails so that you get notified of these types of webinars. And yeah, so if you get a chance to just browse around through here, I did mention to email resumes to careers@forteck.ca, but if you go into here, I think you can apply now right on our website as well. So, and the other cool thing that we have, so yeah, there's contact info. So myself and Danielle, and then gallery, blogs actually is something that would be worth you all checking out. So here's a recording of all of our past webinars that we've done. So here's one I did with my dad. We've done one with Amanda Schoonmaker. She works at the Center for Boreal Research in Peace River. This one was a really great one that she went over a lot of things about leaf site reclamation in Alberta specifically. Here's one that I did just all about Forteck. We had Kathy, who does our safety, so she did a industry talks with Forteck about women in forestry. Brush pile burning, so we're just wrapping up our brush pile burning for the year right now, but it's a webinar that we did regarding pile burning. And yeah, there's a bunch more, multiple pages. So yeah, if you do get a chance, feel free to tour through our website. There's quite a few things on there. The last thing I'll show you guys before we finish off is just our store actually. So we do have a Forteck apparel store now. These power banks work pretty good. Good to have in the woods. We give them out to all our staff. All goods in the wood hoodie. This one's kind of my favorite. And then yeah, we have a bunch of women's clothing as well. Tree planter shirt. So yeah, feel free to tour through our website anytime you're interested in what we're up to. Should be stuff on there. All right, well, thank you everyone for attending. If there's no other questions, then I will go ahead and conclude the webinar.